5 riders had planned to put up their horses at 8th and Walnut. However, 8th was under repairs and all the hitch rails were missing. So they backtracked to Maple and put up their mounts in the alley behind the lumberyard. 3 of the men were brothers who had grown up in the area. Their oldest brother, Frank, was buried in the town cemetery. He had been killed in the line of duty as a U.S. Marshal. The 3 now wore false beards as a disguise. Until now, the primary targets for the Dalton Gang had been trains. Now they were targeting the 2 hometown banks. However, the moment that they stepped out of the alley, one of the Daltons was recognized by Alec McKenna, who happened to be standing near the alley entrance, and he suspected their intentions. Grat Dalton, Bill Power, and Dick Broadwell crossed Walnut Street and entered the Condon Bank. Behind them, Bob and Emmett Dalton passed the front of the Condon, crossed Union Street, and entered the First National Bank. McKenna watched all this, and then to confirm his suspicions, he took a look through the Condon window and saw a Winchester being held in the face of a teller. McKenna stepped back into the dry goods store and gave the alarm. When the bandits entered the Condon, there were 3 employees and 2 customers. Once everyone was secured, Broadwell stood guard at the southeast door and Power at the southwest door. Cashier Ball informed Grat that the vault was on a time lock and couldn't be opened until 9:30. Grat asked what time it was and was told 9:20. "We'll wait," Grat replied. If he would have looked at the clock on the wall, he would have seen that it was 9:40. In fact, the time lock had opened at 8. Grat proceeded to empty the coin drawers into a gunny sack. Soon the sack weighed a couple hundred pounds. Back outside, McKenna was not the only one that recognized the armed Daltons walk into the banks. Word traveled fast down both sides of the plaza. Hardware stores A.P. Boswell and Isham started handing out guns from displays to anyone willing to defend the banks. Men were setting up at both doors at Isham's. Down the street at Barndollar, men positioned a wagon to stand behind. One man even took position on the awning over the Barndollar door. Another group took a stand across the street in front of Reed Brothers. When Luther Perkins saw the commotion down on the street from a second-floor window above the Condon, he raced down the stairs and opened the back door of the bank to give warning. Upon seeing the 3 outlaws with rifles in the bank, he slammed the door and raced back up to his office. Later, he would fire a shot at the bandits as they retreated down the alley. Inside the First National, Bob and Emmett were getting frustrated by Cashier Ayers' stall tactics. Soon, Bob was behind the counter going through drawers, boxes, and the safe. He accumulated $21,000 in a bag, which he handed to Emmett. Hearing the commotion outside, Bob decided to herd the bank employees out the front door ahead of his exit. 2 men, George Cubine and C.S. Cox, were watching the front door of the bank, and as the employees escaped to Isham's, they snapped a quick shot at Bob, which missed. Bob returned fire, hitting Charles Gump in the hand that was holding a shotgun in front of Isham's while watching the Condon Bank. The broken pieces of the gun clattered to the sidewalk as Bob and Emmett retreated out the back door of the First National. Back out on the plaza, townsfolk had opened the ball on the 3 bandits who were clearly visible through the glass front of the Condon Bank. Broadwell fired a shot through the door which hit Arthur Reynolds in the foot. He then placed the muzzle of his gun in the bullet hole in the glass and fired a second shot. This shot ricocheted and entered the second-story window of the Barndollar store. After this wild shot, Parker Williams, who had stationed himself on the awning, decided to surrender his position. Lucius Baldwin had picked up a handgun at the Isham counter and exited out the back into the alley in an effort to flank the outlaws. Seeing Bob and Emmett enter the alley in front of him, Baldwin mistook the Daltons as citizens with the same idea as himself. Baldwin called out for them to wait for him. Bob and Emmett both turned and ordered Baldwin to stop, which he didn't, so Bob shot him. Baldwin would die from his wound a few hours later. 80 shots from townspeople had entered the Condon Bank. At one point, it got so hot inside that the outlaws retreated to the back of the bank with the hostages. Then Power took a shot in the arm and he could no longer operate the Winchester in his hand. Unable to defend himself, it was time to vacate the bank with or without the money. Unable to run out of the bank with a 2-ton sack on his back, Grat emptied the bag onto the floor, picked out the currency bills from the pile of coins, and stuffed them down the front of his vest. It totaled $1,100. Bob and Emmett rounded the corner of 8th and Union, checking to make sure no one was watching. George Cubbine was standing near the door of Rommel Brothers Drug with a rifle in hand looking down the street to the front of the First National Bank. Bob raised his rifle and fired several times. Cubbine collapsed to the boardwalk dead. Shoemaker Charles Brown had been watching from the door of Cubbine's boot shop. Seeing Cubbine collapse on the sidewalk, an unarmed Brown ran out to Cubbine's body, but it was too late, so he bent over to retrieve Cubbine's rifle. Bob fired several more times, and a dead Brown collapsed on top of Cubbine. Bob and Emmett then crossed Union Street. Broadwell was the first to emerge from the convent. Powers was next and Grat last, leaving behind $40,000 in bills inside an unlocked vault. Outside of the bank, the outlaws were in full view of every rifle in the plaza. As bullets rained in on them, Broadwell sprinted across Walnut and down the north side of the alley, picking up several wounds as he went. Behind him, Power ran to a doorway and found it locked. He got hit a few times while testing the door, and as he turned down the alley, he was shot in the back. He staggered down the alley before collapsing. Broadwell had almost made it to the horses, but was on the wrong side of the alley. An oil wagon and team of horses were between him and the shooters on the east of the alley. Unable to get a clear view of the alley because of the frightened team, Broadwell shot the team of horses. After crossing Union Street, Bob ascended a set of stairs for a height advantage. He spotted Cashier Ayres standing armed in front of Isham's store. Bob fired a round that smacked into Ayres' face. The cashier would recover from the wound. Bob and Emmett then traveled west down 8th Street, crossing Walnut. When Grat had entered the alley, he had taken cover behind the staircase. The alley was safe from the townspeople on the south end of the plaza, but was in the direct line of fire for those set up in front of Isham's Hardware, as Broadwell and Power had found out. Returning fire from behind the stairs, Grat started to proceed down the south side of the alley and took up a position behind the oil wagon and dead horses. City Marshal Connolly, liveryman John Clare, and Carrie Seaman had been down on the southwest corner of 9th and Walnut as the bandits fled down the alley. The three men ran down 9th Street, the unarmed marshal borrowed a rifle from another merchant, and the three of them turned east up the lot behind the stores. Clare and Seaman took up positions along the alley fence behind the livery, while Marshal Connolly sprinted toward an opening in the fence on the west side of the stable. Having seen the wounded Broadwell mount his horse and ride out of the alley, Connolly stepped into the alley and proceeded to take aim at the fleeing outlaw. Unfortunately, the marshal had stepped right in front of Grat Dalton, who lifted his rifle without taking aim and shot the marshal in the back. Just as the marshal falls, Seaman fires from behind the fence and hits Grat in the back with a load of buckshot. Grat turns and fires a wild shot at the fence just as Clare takes careful aim with his rifle and sends a slug into Grat's neck, severing his spine. Grat is dead before he hits the ground. Bob and Emmett had turned off 8th Street and run down the small alley behind the Walnut Street shops. This alley intersected with the larger alley that led to the tied-up horses. Just as Bob stepped into the larger alley, he could hear bullets ricocheting off the brick buildings and mistakenly looked up, thinking they were shooters on the rooftops. As he did so, he was hit several times from the rifle stationed in front of Isham's. Emmett, still holding the money sack, ran down the north side of the alley just as Broadwell had. Bob, on the other hand, crossed the alley and sat down next to the jail. He was hit hard, but he tried to rise when he spotted an armed Clare hiding behind the fence. Bob fired a couple wild shots, which missed. Clare's shot did not, and Bob fell back down. Emmett had reached the horses, but two had been hit by errant bullets coming down the alley. He was able to mount his horse and looked back to see his brother Bob sitting down. Instead of fleeing the scene, Emmett rode back to retrieve his brother, and this is when he received his first hits. As he rode up to Bob and reached down to help him mount, he heard Bob express, "It's no use." Emmett wheeled his horse to race out of the alley when a double load of buckshot from Seaman's shotgun knocked him out of the saddle. "They're all down," was the shout that ended the raid that had lasted just under 15 minutes. A small posse rode out after the fleeing Broadwell and found his body just half-mile away where he had fallen from his horse dead. All of the outlaws had possessed a Winchester and at least 2 handguns. Bob had 4 handguns on his body. The rifles were empty and the handguns had not been fired. A lynch mob was starting to form for the only surviving outlaw, Emmett, when Dr. Walter Wells stopped the proceedings by declaring that they would just be hanging a man that was already dead. But Emmett would recover from his wounds and be sent to prison on a life sentence that would be pardoned after 15 years. When all the loot was returned to the banks, the final tally showed the First National with a profit of $1.98, while the Condon showed a deficit of $20.
4 out of 5 outlaws dead, and Coffeyville still celebrates and remembers the town defenders. 4 dead, 3 wounded, and all the town's heroes that stood up that fateful day.